Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's video is a step-by-step retouching tutorial, so follow along to see exactly how I edit and retouch my images. I'm here in Adobe Photoshop and I will be using some plugins, but all of these are linked in the caption for you. So let's get started. I've got this stunning image of my model here. This was from a very recent shoot that I did. I did some color grading and some very basic editing in Lightroom, and now I've imported the image into Photoshop, and here is where I do majority of my retouching work. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the background layer. I do this by just clicking Command J, but you can also do this by right clicking onto the background layer and then clicking duplicate layer. I'll be working on the layer 1, which is the duplicate, so I always keep a background layer there that I'm not touching, just in case I want to go back to anything and want to revert to the original. The first things I do when I retouch is I start with the healing brush and I start kind of like removing any imperfections, anything on the backdrop, things that I just want to remove. Luckily my model has absolutely gorgeous skin. The only thing I'm going to do here is maybe touch up some of these flyaway hairs. I used to be very strict on flyaway hairs and I would remove pretty much all of them. I've kind of started to embrace them a bit more and keep them in my images a lot more because it doesn't always have to be perfect, and I quite like the imperfect look that some of these are giving. But yeah, I'm going to quickly speed this up and then get back to you. My model has really gorgeous nails, but they have grown out a bit, so I will go to this new healing brush tool. I actually am really enjoying this. I'm using this quite a lot. And then I will make this a bit smaller and then just kind of like go over these grown out edges. And as you can see, it doesn't give you any harsh lines. It just kind of blends the natural nail with the manicured nail, and I actually really kind of like how that looks, and it's so easy, so you don't have to spend so much time cloning or doing anything. And because the picture is not a detail shot of her nails, I actually think it looks really good. And I'll do that on the other hand as well, where it's visible. Sometimes it can give you not perfect results, so if that happens, I usually just undo and then go back in and kind of like adjust where I've painted or where I've kind of selected the area to be removed. Sometimes you just have to give it another try. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how that looks right now. I'm now moving on to the dress, and I'm only going to touch up a few little of those wrinkles. I've started removing all of the seam lines as well because I think it just gives a bit more of a polished image. It's totally personal preference though. I'm using that same healing brush and I just go over some of these because I just find it gives really quick and nice results, and it just leaves it looking like quite seamless. I will then go into a bit more detailing when we go further along with my retouch to kind of make it look even more perfect, but this is kind of like my first step to removing any of those like fabric wrinkles that might be a bit distracting to look at. Sometimes you have to go over them more than once, but I just kind of like see what they look like and then kind of use my own judgment if they need more or not. I'm not super fussed about these ones around the bump because I think if I removed all of them, it would then start to look quite unnatural because fabric naturally just drapes around the body, and when you are shooting maternity and you're working with maternity clients, it's only natural that the fabric would gather around these areas. So I'm not going to remove all of these, but I will remove the ones that I find will be the most distracting when you're looking at the final image. I'm pretty happy with how that looks right now. The next thing I move on to is dodge and burn. So dodge and burn is a technique that I like to use over anything else. When it comes to skin retouching, I find it gives me the most natural results, and it's a non-destructive retouching technique. So you're not affecting any of the pixels, you're just affecting the luminosity of the image. So I use Retouching Academy panels, and I have been for like the entirety of my career. I love them. I think they're absolutely amazing. they have everything that you need. So if you're interested in any of these panels, they're linked below. But yeah, I use the Legacy panel for most of my kind of like basic retouching. And then I also sometimes use the Makeup Artist Retouch panel for anything to do with, tweaking of the makeup, skin tones, things like that. But for Dodge and Burn, I'm going to use the Legacy panel and click on the Dodge and Burn curves. This will automatically give me the layers that I need. So we've got visual aid layers. I like to do my Dodge and Burn on a black and white layer because you can see a lot better where you need to be painting the Dodge and the Burn. And then you've got the Dodge and Burn actual layers where you'll be working on. They also come with a brush preset. So I really like this one. So I usually just press on this once. It gives me the perfect Dodge and Burn brush. The only thing I will adjust is I like my flow to be on 2. I just work with that really well and it gives me great results. So what I'll be doing here is I will be looking at the image and then start to paint in, for example, where I see some darkness. So Dodge is always making things brighter. So you would be painting on the dark areas to make them a bit lighter. And then Burn is the opposite. So if I clicked on the Burn layer, I would then go on to maybe some brighter areas and they would then become darker. It's really detailed work and you might not see the results straight away when you're working, but that's the magic about Dodge and Burn. It's a technique that is not super easily detected, but it still helps with keeping the skin incredibly even and just giving you the opportunity to even out skin without actually affecting the pixels and changing the image. Let me speed this up for you for a bit. What Dodge and Burn is also amazing for, not just to even out things, but it can also be used to highlight and contour things. So for example, I like to use it as well to kind of like bring out the highlights of the face a bit more, or maybe like darken a few shadows that are naturally there. So I could be, for example, then going over the highlight here to make it pop even more, or like bring out a bit more lightness here on the eyelid, on the nose, where the light would naturally hit the face. And again, with Burn, I could be kind of like darkening a few shadow areas that I want to contour a bit more, which would then bring a bit more dimension to the image. And as you can see, here's a little before, here's a little after, and we've kept all that beautiful texture and all those like pixels and things were only affecting the luminosity of the image. This is another thing where I love to use Dodge and Burn, is to bring out and highlight the bump a bit more. So for example, on the high points where the light would be hitting the bump, I would be brightening the image a bit, and then on the contour parts where we see a few more shadows, I'm going to brush over with some darkness to bring out and kind of contour the bump even more. Right, so this is what the image is looking like after Dodge and Burn. Here we've got the before, here we've got the after. I'm super happy with what the skin is looking like, so I'm going to delete the visual aid layer because we're not using it anymore, we don't need it. And then now I'm going to quickly work on the dress a bit more. So this is kind of the only time I will ever use frequency separation, is when it comes to maybe adjusting some dresses, some fabrics. This is where frequency separation, in my opinion, comes in really handy. I wouldn't necessarily use it on skin because I think it gives not a very natural result, but that's my personal opinion. So I will go down here to frequency separation in the same Retouching Academy panel, and I like to use frequency separation via Gaussian blur. So once you hit that, it will give you the Gaussian blur, and you can set this wherever you think you like it. The default with this panel is 6.4, and I always get amazing results with that, so I'll leave it at that. So here we have a few different layers within the frequency separation group. We've got the low frequency, which are the colors, and then we've got the high frequency, which is the texture. So I like to go in and work on the texture layer first and kind of go into the cloning brush and I make sure that current layer is selected. So it's only affecting the current layer, which is only affecting the texture. And then I'm going to work on these areas where I removed some of these fabric wrinkles and then just slightly go over these. And as you can see, it's starting to slightly soften them, which is what I like. And again, here we've got some kind of fabric texture, which I find a bit distracting. So I'm just gonna very lightly go over these areas where I think there's a bit too much texture there. You always have to be careful where you're sourcing your texture from your clone stamp, because you don't want to add more texture. You want to, or sometimes you might want to add more texture, and then this is also very beneficial. You can pinpoint it from a point where you like the texture and then apply it to where you want to then brush it in. So now I'm going to select the low frequency layer and get my mixer brush. Mixer brush is a really beneficial tool, but when your settings are not quite right, it can give you some really crazy results. So how I like my mixer brush is I have this turned on. I have my wetness set to 80, my load to 75, mix to 90, and then flow to 10. This is what I find gives me the best results. I usually don't tweak them much and just see how it turns out. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to start kind of painting over some of these areas where we're still kind of seeing a bit of those wrinkles where I told you earlier that we're going to go in and kind of perfect those. So this is what I'm doing. And what Mixer Brush does, it kind of like merges all of these colors together. And why frequency separation is great for this is because I'm working only on the low frequency layer. So it's only affecting the colors. It's not affecting any of the texture. So we can blend things without actually blending the texture, which will then give you unnatural looking results. So I'm only going very lightly over some other, see, it was a bit too much. You have to be also very mindful where you're brushing, because if you brush too much, you'll end up getting like a really flat looking image. And that's also why I don't like it very much for skin retouching. It's because I find that the skin will then start looking like really flat, and I don't like that personally. Let's just see what this looks like before and after. This was the before, this was the after. Also with my frequency separation, I then usually turn the whole group down a bit. This will depend on the image and like how much I've worked on the image and how much frequency separation I've used. For this image, I think at around 70, between 70 and 80% looks still quite nice. And it's kind of evened out those areas a little bit. I'm really liking how that looks. I just want to bring out her eyes a little bit more. So this is where I'm going to go into the MUA retouch panel. And I'm going to select eye drops. Again, it's giving me a few different layers, and I'm going to talk you through what each of these does. So clean eye whites, very self-explanatory. I'm going to put this up to about 5, and then you can start kind of painting over some of these eye white areas. And not particularly with this image, but some models, when they have like really bloodshot eyes or things like that, this will really help clean things up and make it look really nice and bright. Then I'm going to move on to light, add light. And here it's very important that we have a white brush selected. And I don't usually paint over the entire eye because I think it gives very unnatural results. I usually just paint where I just want a bit more brightness. So for example, I love bright catch lights. So like I would go over these a little bit and then maybe very lightly go over the iris just to give a little bit more vibrancy to them without adding like unnaturally bright looking eyes. And then again, I usually don't use, I mean, I could use the darken a little bit for her waterline. So then I would select the dark or a black brush and then just very lightly brush over. This is also great if you wanted to darken some areas. And like to me right now, I think that looks a bit too much. So again, I will select the whole group and then just tone it down slightly, about 65. And then see, kind of gives just that very subtle difference, but I think it makes a difference. If I wanted to work on the eyes just a little bit more, I could add a few lashes and fill in her eyebrows just very slightly. So again, I will press on the lashes button and it will give me these options. So here I can select the lash color. So what I usually do is I will double click on the color and then use the color picker to kind of pick me a similar color to what her natural lashes in the image are. And then we want kind of like a very nice thin brush. So they also have a brush preset here, which is amazing. So I'm going to click on this and then zoom in very, very much and make the brush look nice and small. And then just start very lightly brushing in just a few lashes, just to fill in those gaps. I don't want to give any, I don't want to make her look like she's wearing fake lashes. That's not the intention at all. It kind of just fills in a few of those gaps. So right now, as you can see, the lashes look a lot sharper than the actual natural lashes in her image or in the image. So what I will do here, you could either just turn down the opacity a little bit, but that will just affect the color of the lashes. So what I usually like to do is I will select where I just drew the lashes. I'll click on filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur. Right now the blur is way too high, so I'll go down to like just lightly blurring them, usually like 0.2 or 0.3 I think looks quite nice, so I'll do that. And then if I find that maybe the color is a little bit off, I can always change it and then it'll give me like a more natural result. And then if you zoom out, you can see they look pretty nice and natural. And then what I do for the eyebrows is the exact same thing. I use the lashes again, I use the lash brush, and then I will select like an eyebrow color and then start drawing in a few little eyebrow hairs, again very lightly. This doesn't need to be super dark or super perfect. This is just to kind of fill in a few of those gaps. And just like with the lashes, I'll just blur these slightly just to make it look more like the original image. And here we are. This is the before and this is the after. Just even them out a little bit more. And I will rename this eyebrows. All right, my next step is usually adding a bit more dimension to my image, and I use one of my favorite plugins for this. This plugin is called Lumenzia, and it looks like this. You can kind of select bright or dark areas of your image, and it just does an incredible job at that. So what I usually do, I go to the very, very brightest area of my image, and it gives me kind of a preview of the areas that are selected. So the bright areas in this instance are the ones that are going to be selected. You can adjust these, but I'm actually usually pretty happy with what the selection looks like. I'll click on selection and then turn that into a curves layer. I usually feather mine for about 20, and then it'll give me here the curves preview. And now if I'm going to adjust any of these, it'll only affect those bright areas that the plugin has selected. So just to show you, like if I go all the way up, as you can see, it affects the bright areas in the image. I don't want to go too overboard. I usually just like to kind of lift my highlights just so ever so slightly. And then I will do the same with the darkest parts of the image. If I wanted to have a bit more, I could always play around with these kind of preset things. But for me right now, I think I'm very happy with the very darkest parts of the image. Again, I will press selection and then another curves adjustment layer. And then to make them darker, I will just pull it down slightly. Really minuscule, but if you see the before and after, you could also go up and kind of bring those up a bit and like make them brighter. For me, I think this is looking really good. And then if you wanted to see a before and after of both of these, I'll press Command G and make a group. And then here's a before, here's the after. It's very subtle, but still, I kind of love how it makes the image look just a little bit more dynamic. Now this next part is probably one of the most fun parts of editing. It's color correcting. And I use another plugin for this, which is just absolutely incredible. It's the Infinite Color Suite, and it randomly just generates unique color grades for your images whenever you press this button. You have a few things that you can adjust here. I usually go down with my intensity, and then let's just see what happens if I press create. So as you can see, it kind of gives me a few different layers, and these is because I have all of these selected. I could be turning these off, and then like it would also automatically turn those off here. Kind of play around with it until I have a color grade that I absolutely love. Every time you press this, it will affect these layers on your image. So for example, here, all of these will have changed because we've regenerated a new color grade. For example, I love how this looks already. There's a little before and after. And you could also then turn up the intensity, and it would then make it more or less intense. And you can individually apply different opacities to these as well, or individually turn these off if you find that you prefer a result without or with certain layers turned off or on. So I will kind of press this a few times till I kind of get a result that I really like. So this is the color grade that I went for with this image. I think the cooler tones really work well with the white dress, and it brings out the dark hair and everything really nicely. And then let's just quickly show you the before. And this is the after. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this very quick follow along retouching tutorial. If you have any questions about anything that I did, please leave me a comment, and I'll see you at the next one. Thanks for watching.